Welcome back to codingcat.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks. Brought to you by Cloudinary. Build faster with AI-powered image and video APIs. Need better search? Try Algolia, powering discovery. Welcome back, perfect peeps, to codingcat.dev podcast. I have on the show with me today Thomas Johnson, and he is the CTO of Multiplayer. Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing great. Thanks for coming on and dealing with all my craziness. My schedule's a mess today. So yeah, I want to dive in a little bit to can you give me like the 1 minute what is Multiplayer, and then we'll like backtrack into kind of your big long journey in tech and what got you on this road?
Sure. Yeah. So Multiplayer makes tools for teams that work on distributed software. So distributed software is pretty much any software these days. If you've got a web app or a mobile app, it usually talks to a backend, which might have some microservices, and that might talk to some other things like Amazon S3 and lots of other stuff. So
there's always like 1,000 moving parts in every
exactly. And so that's what we do, and we help to visualize your system architecture, all the dependencies. We bring together the APIs, your environments. We put it in a tool that's real-time and collaborative, like Figma, but kind of for the back end. So if you have a distributed team and you can't schedule meetings and get in front of a whiteboard together anymore to talk about this stuff, you can edit all of this kind of information within Multiplayer, have it version controlled, show diffs and changes to things, to have design reviews, and all that kind of stuff. We've got a feature that we're launching shortly called Radar, which takes the manual work out of doing this stuff. So from your system, we'll detect your system architecture, your APIs, and things like that, so you don't have to do this stuff manually. And we have a feature called Pulsar coming out at the end of the summer, which will allow you to create a platform from scratch, from a template, and click to deploy to different environment types. It's the tool that I've always wanted to have as a software developer for my entire career, and now I get a chance to build it and share it with people.
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing cloud architecture for different companies, like this tool would have been huge. Tracking down stuff is always kind of a nightmare, especially when you're reading through like a cloud formation or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like I can't even get to the end of this thing. It's so long, right? So
right.
That's awesome. Well, I love it. I have to know, I always kind of lead in with this, how you got started in tech and what kind of drove that. I know you got a couple different universities under your belts, but I'd love to even hear the spark of like what got you into the development side before that.
Sure. Well, I got started programming when I was a kid, and my dad got an Apple II Plus computer.
Yeah.
Was sitting in his study, and so I, naturally, like little kid, I was thinking I was maybe about 10 years old at the time. Just searching around the house. I see this thing, but I see a joystick next to it. I'm like, this looks like an Atari game console. What is this thing? So there was a manual next to it. I opened it up and just started playing around. And I discovered that you could write a little BASIC, get the input from the joystick, and draw a dot on the screen.
Wow.
Control it with the joystick. So that was my first foray into programming. I was like, I created a drawing program for myself, and that I was hooked. I was like, wow, this is magical. This is so cool. So I started from there, and then
I have to cut you off. I have to ask you, like, did you ever play Carmen Sandiego on that thing?
Yes.
I loved that game on our Apple II. That was my first computer too. So sorry. Yeah.
Lots of great games. Castle Wolfenstein. I mean, that I still have sort of nightmares about that sound. Achtung, out of nowhere, like so loud. Achtung. And
oh my gosh.
Some of the old games are awesome.
That's great.
But yeah, I started out there. So it's always fun for me. I didn't even know until really college that you could actually have a major in computer science and go and work in the industry. It was just, But when I discovered that, I was like, this is it for me. Got into things like neural networks at the time. This is like the late 80s, early 90s. Went to graduate school for robotics and AI. From there, worked for a speech recognition company in Boston. Segued into building large distributed systems as the internet started coming around, and that's what I've been doing really since then. So
That's awesome. Yeah, it seems like kind of taking that early excitement and things like that is always kind of the hook for people to get into these things. And I always kind of find like the job that you end up finding is your path for so much longer after that. And it's if you ever want to pivot and like change, like if you want to go from distributed systems and IoT stuff and then like go full on like native mobile programming, it's often a challenge to like even break out of that field because you're kind of
sure.
in it, you know everything. And so it's cool that you've been able to kind of follow that path and that journey as you've kind of rose up through the ranks and everything.
Yeah,
So,
I did fall into the trap though of like, hey, it's so easy. I was into telecom software and voice over IP
oh,
for several years, probably a little bit longer than I would have liked, just because it was such a niche, and I knew a lot of things, and it was easy to get good gigs. So it is hard to break out of that and go to something new. But
yeah,
I always tell people who consider programming is that it's a great skill to learn because you can apply it to so many industries.
yeah,
But if you go into one, there's no, you might go deep into that, but you can always switch and learn something completely new. You're always learning, which I love about
totally.
this field.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty incredible. Especially like you want to pick up a new language or anything like that, you can always switch and keep building
Yeah.
and building.
Yeah.
It's not a negative, it's just an additive you gotta keep building upon. So that's really cool. I'm also curious, like from your background in VoIP and stuff like that, is there any like crazy things you picked up or found out that you were like shocked by working in that industry?
Oh, that's a good question. When you see how the sausage is made,
Right.
you're kind of amazed at times that things work at all.
Yeah.
Especially when you get down. I don't want to name names here, but in some of the companies or clients I've worked for, just to see the tape and the glue and the
Yeah.
just things wiring together these
Yeah.
systems, and you just think, wow, if but the whole house of cards could like go down at any time.
Totally. Yeah.
But
Yeah, we were actually, I don't know why I just thought about this, but we were talking with a Google Cloud engineer, and he works on like the full networking globally. And I was like, well, what was the biggest thing that like you learned or the impact? And he's like, I didn't know like boat anchors were gonna be such a big issue for our cabling, like as deep down in the ocean as all this stuff is. I'm like, wait a minute, so you guys have issues with like container ships wrecking your network? He's like, all the time. I'm like,
wow,
wow, I had no
yeah,
idea. So the things you kind of like learn in those different areas are just wild to me.
sure.
That's awesome. So, to kind of break into our subject area of the day, like the system design, software architecture, was that always kind of a piece for you, or as your career started to kind of blossom and grow, like that became more important than like just programming at that point?
Well, that's a good question. I was really introduced to distributed systems early on in my career. Through, I mean, when I worked for the speech recognition company, we would be used by telecom companies. A very early speech recognition would be the sort of voice dialing, on your phone, call Tom, whatever.
Yeah.
So we'd use our speech recognition and then complete a call. But if you touch telecom at all, it's all distributed systems. It's all millions and millions of subscribers, and how do you scale that, and all of the things that eventually, I don't want to say relearned, but maybe rediscovered by maybe newer engineers in the early days of the web and the internet, were already things and patterns in telecom for decades.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I was introduced. I was fascinated by it. There's something about having multiple components of software talking to each other and the things that could go wrong and dealing with the issues, and that I always thought felt like a living thing. This dynamic system with all these challenges, much more interesting than just desktop software.
Right. Yep.
Where, yeah,
or a simple HTML page or anything like that.
Yeah,
that's a good point. There's
so
a lot more to think about and track, and
definitely. So I ended up doing a lot of software development and bringing that knowledge to the companies I'd worked for, and as a freelancer, in early 2000s and beyond, I would tend to work with companies that were starting to get their success. Like they got the first version of the product out, got some product market fit, starting to scale, and thinking and like suffering from the early design problems that they made, and not really knowing how to fix stuff and make it scalable. So I would come in and help out. And so, it was great. First of all, it's fun. I love the early phases of software development. And I think with the companies that I worked for in the 2000s and 2010s, I went through the progression of moving things to the cloud, outsourcing certain things to SaaS providers, microservices architectures and things like that early. Would see the pain points of not making the right decisions earlier on, having to refactor and dealing with technical debt. And a lot of that fed into multiplayer, and the whole reason to have a product like this is to help those companies starting out, or those companies that are transitioning from monolithic things to the cloud, or non-cloud architecture to cloud architecture. And because these days, I would say 10, 15 years ago, not every company had this sort of distributed system kind of architecture.
Sure.
Today, every company does.
Yeah.
You're not doing everything in-house. You're picking and choosing pieces. You're trying to outsource this to a SaaS provider, this to a cloud provider. You're doing as little as possible in-house these days, where you used to try to do everything in-house.
Yeah, totally.
And so these are every company problems now. And part of I'm trying to take my knowledge of like how to do things and put it into a tool that others can use. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Gosh, you set me up for a perfect ad break. So we'll come back and talk a little bit more about different system design aspects that we'll get into, and we'll definitely be talking a little bit more about multiplayer itself. So stay tuned.
Cloudinary allows you to remove any unwanted backgrounds, so you can reuse assets efficiently. You can also erase objects and people from images for placement in new experiences. For more engaging content, easily turn static images into dynamic animations, and rely on smart cropping to always deliver assets with a focus on the most relevant objects to your brand. Cloudinary Programmable Media. Build faster with AI-powered image and video APIs.
Algolia helps you create a search and discovery engine in 3 steps. Step 1, import your data. Import the API client, initialize the client and index, load the local JSON file, and then push to Algolia. Step 2, configure relevance. Define searchable attributes, add business metric, specify facets and filtering. And step 3, build your search UI, import widgets from the library, add instant search component, add search input, refine by attribute, display results, add pagination. And just like that, you're done. Build search effortlessly with Algolia.
All right, we talked a little bit about distributed systems, your history, and now we can dive in a little bit more into multiplayer and how we're going to resolve some of these crazy messes of distributed systems as we go forward. Do you want to dive into kind of a little bit of the sharing portion and show what multiplayer is capable of, and then we can talk more generally?
Sounds great.
Okay.
So I'll do a quick demo. So a quick peek into multiplayer to a real world system architecture. One of our design partners called Filing Wrap has has been gracious enough to allow us to use them as a demo when we show the product. This is an example of their architecture. But before I go into some details, I'd like to talk about the before times, what tools they were using before multiplayer. So they're a lot like many companies trying to use a diagramming tool to capture system architecture. So here's an example for anybody using like Visio, or this is diagrams.net or Nero or FigJam or something like that. You're using a tool that doesn't know, it's a collection of boxes and lines. It doesn't know that you're doing a system architecture. It doesn't know how to differentiate that from an org chart. It's just a bunch of things, and you have to manually put this stuff together. But here is, a typical architecture web app. You've got an auth service, a web API, a search service, some other things internally, and some backend services, Redis, Elasticsearch, things like that. So, so if I'm creating a new feature, say I'm going to add the AI assist feature to my products, maybe I'll have a microservice to do the AI assist, and maybe I'm going to add a dependency to OpenAI. And here I am. I'm pushing pixels around. This is kind of painful. Say I proxy AI assist through the web API, and that calls OpenAI. Okay. So I've made my design in order to, when you're working on distributed software, a lot of it is about communication. Okay. So I have to communicate maybe to my tech lead or CTO about my design, maybe socialize that amongst my peers, get feedback. Maybe it's talk to QA about what they might need to test, or DevOps about what they're going to need to manage or add to the cluster, or the web team about what their piece of the puzzle, what they need to call to implement their piece. In order to communicate what I've changed, I have to have a meeting. Nobody would be able to tell that I've added this and I've added this. So diagramming tools are not really that great. Yeah. Plus it's manual work. Plus it's going to be out of date in no time unless you're really on top of it. And it gets really, look at all these lines. What's connected to what?
Yeah. It's kind of a mess. It's a spaghetti web.
It's a mess. So that's one aspect. So the system architecture. Now let's talk about the APIs. If here's a common, so here's Swagger,
Open APIs,
visualization of Open API. And, these things get complicated quickly. It's a lot of stuff. But if I were to add 3 methods, a lot of features are just minor changes to an API. If I were to make a few changes, again, I'd need that meeting to say, okay, here is the, products, APIs that I've added. The web team would not be able to know from this. Now you might say, well, let's go to the Open API, but here it is. It's about, these things get long pretty fast. It's about 9,000 lines. This is limited to developers to be able to kind of look at, and ideally you wouldn't be looking at the full file. You'd be looking at just, diffs and changes, something purpose built. But there might be other things like environment variables, things like that, that you need to communicate to DevOps. And it's all spread out into multiple different tools. So inside of multiplayer, here's that same architecture. We've got dependency lines that are updated. We've got auto layout. We pulled together your platforms, your components. We have rich text docs. So if you have sketches, so instead of having the whiteboard picture, you can have the whiteboard here and have it multiplayer, real-time, collaborative. We've got rich text docs and notebooks and API designers. So we connect to your repositories so that you're connecting these visualizations to real implementations and code. And we pull together your environments. Soon you'll be able to click to deploy as well. And I mentioned that most of the work that you do, even with the other tools, is manual. But a feature that we have in development that's coming out soon called Radar can use your system itself to detect all of the components, APIs, dependencies directly without any manual work at all. And you know it's based on the source of truth of what is actually in your system. And it will, basically take that manual work out, which is really a big deal. And over time, we're going to add more features to Radar, like platform debugging, so that you can, record a session and have the deep traces. So rather than like Chrome Inspector, where you get to see the network traffic just to your public APIs and it stops there and your platform's a black box, we'll add the network traces inside of your platform. So if you've got a QA team that's discovered a bug, they'll be able to record their session and send it to the backend developer. If you have a customer that's complaining of an issue, they'll be able to send you that full deep trace, and you won't have to spend those hours trying to reproduce a problem. So we're really excited about that.
How does something like the discovery on that work? Are you trying to like tap into a Terraform file and then that kind of spills that out? What's that typically look like?
So for the discovery and the tracking, we use OpenTelemetry, but we're using the telemetry in a different way than the APM provider is. Instead of just sort of throwing logs and sort of traces and essentially you have to go and dig in to figure out what's going on, we analyze those traces and look for things that are important for documentation, like what are the components in a platform. We'll discover the web app, the services, all of the dependencies, what uses what, and we're also, one of the other cool things we have in development, if you ever seen like sequence diagrams, it can be very valuable if you want to say just see the how authentication works. And here is a view into your platform that shows the components that are just related to authentication. But to have that sequence, those transactions, and say, oh, for this feature, this calls this, which calls this, which calls this, right? That is, you never see it, because it's manually documenting that stuff is so hard, and your system changes so frequently that it gets out of date even quicker than your system diagram.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll be able to auto document that stuff and discover all of the flows, what we call them flows in your platform, all the unique flows, be able to show them. And it's just going to be an invaluable way of taking your distributed platform, which is a lot of times a black box, and giving it, shining light on it, and taking the manual work out of documenting these things.
And I know with multiplayer, a big part of it is kind of that, I always think of Figma multiplayer stuff, like having more than one person in there. When you were talking about like meetings and things like that, are you often all in there trying to like comment and build a spec out like this, or what does that look like?
Yeah, well, you think about, so here's an example of a couple sessions, where, my squiggle, I can see it on both sides, but every part of multiplayer is this real-time collaborative feature where you don't have just a document that one person is editing or another. You're working together. And the concept of collaboration and communication is so important with working on distributed systems. You're always working with people. You want to work with the other people in your team. They have to know about, whether it's a concept sketch, like here is a concept sketch about versioning, and this might be requirements about a versioning feature, or let me show you here I've got branches. So my AI assist branch, I can show the diffs and changes, what I've changed in this architecture for my feature. You want everybody to be able to see this, edit it in real time, maybe even give a design review, for your feature. So you feel connected, because teams are distributed these days. Most teams are spread out all over the world, as is ours. And that's an essential feature. That real-time collaboration is really key, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. It is definitely difficult with so many remote people, keeping them all kind of on the same page and having those meetings and not having a whiteboard or anything like that. That's really cool. How do you kind of see, and maybe Do you have anything else in the actual multiplayer app at this point?
I think this is a good place. Yeah, so I guess we pulled together your GitHub repositories, environments, documents, components, and other things. And as I mentioned before, at the end of the summer, you'll be able to create a platform and compose one from pre-built components. That's the other thing I've always wanted. I don't want to build authentication for the 9,000th time in my career. I want to drag it into my platform, and you'll be able to do that with third-party SaaS providers and container-based components. And you'll be able to deploy to a bunch of different environment types. So we're going to support in the beginning AWS, Kubernetes, different cloud providers, container runner services like Fargate and others, and Docker Compose, and you'll be able to create your own environment types. Think of it as like an open pass solution where, unlike having a black box like Heroku, it's going to be open where you're going to see and be able to fork and change all the Terraform code for creating this stuff and managing it. But you can start a platform with the best, as if you had the best DevOps people working for you full time.
That's cool. No, I love that. With FusionAuth, I'm a DevRel at FusionAuth in my day job, and to be able to like just pull in authentication like that into it with a Docker Compose and like get up and running, and it's part of your architecture, that would be huge. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. So to shift gears just slightly, it's kind of some of the talking points we had listed out here. One of them is how AI can truly support system design. I'm dying to know, is that like part of the radar solution, or is this kind of even more so like something additional on top of it?
Yeah, so we are developing our AI assist feature now, and the nice thing about having all this information in one place is that you can in software replicate that what is typically a human. Like you usually have in the team the one person who knows all the things,
right?
where stuff is.
Yeah.
You can walk up to the whiteboard and give that architecture discussion. Now, that's great, but that person can also walk out the door easily with all that knowledge. So by using multiplayer, all that knowledge is there, and we can use that. We can take your system architecture, the dependencies, all the APIs, any notebooks or rich text docs and sketches and things that have to do with system architecture, and use it either as an internal tool, like you just want to ask questions if you're new, you want to figure some things out. Maybe you're working on a part of a system you're not familiar with, that kind of thing. So you'll be able to ask questions with chat interface. But I also see we're going to apply this to your public APIs and things that you share with your customers and partners, because one thing I don't want to do anymore is look at documentation and Swagger files. I don't want to look at that long list of APIs and think, where do I even start? You should be able to chat with your system. Your customers should be able to chat with your system and just say, how do I connect to you? Generate some JavaScript code.
Right.
Try it, run. Oh, I'm logged in. Okay, how do I get, for filing round, how do I get filings for the last 30 days? Generate some code for JavaScript. Try it. And that is the future of this kind of system development.
Yeah,
that's
AI
really is going to be right. So, and when you get into the Pulsar, it's when you're starting a system, we're going to allow our AI assist to help with best practices. So there's a lot of knowledge in system design that you gain over time. But if you're starting out, you don't have all of that knowledge. You'll build it, but it comes through experience. And so we're putting that experience into an AI assist to help with Pulsar to, whether it's templates or AI assist, describe your problem and have subsystems that are suggested. And then this composable architecture, not just drag and drop components like services and other things, but many platforms. Platforms for us can be composed of other platforms. So imagine like a DevOps platform for observability, or a user's platform or authentication platform.
Yep.
And those sorts of things. So yeah, we're really excited about that.
And so are those going to be like the models you will have to train yourself, or do you anticipate kind of like a general model for like general architecture topics and things like that? But then like once a larger company wants to get in there, I assume you would want to tune that model to like their current system and like expectations they might have. Is that kind of that piece of the AI solution that you'll have to get into?
Yeah, so we'll have something that's trained on a broad variety of data for system architecture kind of recommendations. But there's also the AI piece, which is using your data and an expert on your stuff. And we're going to explore like how many knobs we allow people to tune, whether there's some fine tuning or RAG based. We're using a combination of both right now for our AI assist, and it's going to be exciting over time to discover like what people are going to want to do. And we, right now we know that while the coding assistants are great, it's just, you're limited from the scope of like the function you're trying to code. We're trying to bring that up to the system architecture.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to demonstrate with Pulsar the ability to just chat, create a system architecture, and auto-generate initial code for your API methods for the services that you want. I mean, I want that. Don't you want that?
Like I'm sitting here thinking like if I could chat and say, our XYZ API is getting hammered, how can we add caching? And it like drops this whole like Redis piece in and like caches it out. Like that'd be incredible in my mind. So yeah, love it. That's really cool. I'm reading our notes a little more here. The differentiators for AI system design tools will be their data set and the problems they are solving. I think we touched on that.
Yeah. It's, AI is only as good as the data that you provide.
Yep, exactly.
Bottom line. And so by putting together the right data for system architecture, which you do by using just by benefit of just using multiplayer, your system architecture, your APIs, all that. Not only is it good for you as just a developer to be able to find things easily and know where things are, but if you're trying to use AI to do interesting things like generate the grunt work code for you, it should have that system perspective. It should you need to know more than just the single file you happen to be working on. And so that stuff is the data for this particular problem. Yeah.
Nice. Yep. So outside of like the actual product work, and I know you guys are startup mode, like you're going as fast as possible. In my mind, like this is also, there should be a consulting arm to some degree to start to say, we'll take on your system design type of activity and like spec it out and like get it correct. Do you see that as part of multiplayer as you progress through this?
I think what we're going to do is partner with companies that are consulting companies. We see this as rather than provide the consulting services ourselves. We want to stay a software company, but there is a great opportunity partnerships with consulting firms, because when you think about an engagement, you have to produce something, and you have to produce maybe some documentation of the thing you built. And there's no better thing you could provide is a workspace inside of multiplayer with your system architecture, dependencies, APIs hooked up, Radar hooked up to your system, and other tools that will have, launch over time with this focus, so that they can take it on and continue developing it. That is like the intellectual property is not just the running software, but it's all the knowledge about it.
Totally.
All the documentation. So rather than, we find a lot of consulting firms just use disparate tools. You have Google Docs over there. You might have some Jira and Confluence over here. They don't really talk to each other. It's just stuff. And it's not kind of up to date or built for system architecture things or collaboration. So yeah, we see really partnering, as we've started to do already, with firms that want to provide multiplayer to their customers.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. I was sitting here thinking, like in my previous job, that's what we did. We were consulting. We built out like web apps and things like that. But a big part of my job was on the cloud architecture side, and having
Yeah.
a tool like this to like walk into a business and drop everything in, like it would be amazing. So props to what you're building. I really
Thank
like
you.
the idea. Anything else I'm missing on multiplayer, or just kind of system design in general?
No, I think we've touched on all the things we're developing. It's been it's been a wild ride so far. We're super excited for what's coming out this summer, and looking to grow, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know you have some cool investors behind you, people from Launch Darkly and DigitalOcean and everywhere else. So I
Yep.
think they
Yeah.
see the vision. So
Yeah.
that's cool. Awesome. We're going to do our last little bit. We call it perfect picks. I'll go first. So I've been running around a lot lately. We've been on vacations and I've been out to conferences and everything else, doing the usual DevRel gig as it goes. And so I've actually got Netflix set up just to download what it thinks I would like to watch, and this popped up. I like Glenn Powell. Like I've seen him all the way back in Batman, and his career is like taking off, and he's in like everything right now. And this was a great show. It's called Hitman. And I thought they could have actually. So it's based on a real story, which I didn't know. It comes up at the end. I thought it was like a Fargo thing where it's like, oh, not really, but okay. And so when you watch it, like he breaks into all these different characters, and it's absolutely incredible. I wish they actually would have spent more time in those characters for Glenn, but it's a cool story. It's an easy watch. I was on a 3-hour flight, and 2 hours of it was with Hitman, so highly recommend checking that out for sure. It is R rating. Don't watch with kids.
I
Tom,
want to see that. I've been planning. Yeah, I've been meaning to check that out.
yeah, I feel like it's my first Glenn Powell, and then Twisters 2 or Twisters, I think plural, comes out instead of Twister.
Yeah.
Comes out at some point this year, so I'm pretty excited for that too.
Cool.
All right, Glenn. All right, Tom, what is your pick? Yours is probably
Okay.
cooler than mine.
So I watch a lot, but the thing that popped into my head first when you asked me about this is just give a backstory. I like to draw comics. I've always liked to. So in school, I would just, instead of listening to the teacher, I would just draw.
That's awesome.
But now I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I like to draw her some welcome home messages. So when she comes home, she sees a little one-pager sketch of us with word bubbles doing, I don't know, something silly. It's just a fun little ritual we have. And she'll sketch.
Are you doing those digitally or on paper?
On paper.
Okay.
I do some digital sketching. I like it, but there's nothing that beats like pencil and paper. Or I actually use her Crayola markers. Add a little color.
Yeah.
But I started reading this book. Scott McCloud is amazing. This is Making Comics, and I recommend this to anybody. You don't even have to be making comics or interested in drawing. It's super entertaining, and it has, you can learn a lot just about communicating with people and communicating ideas.
Yeah.
And especially if you have to, go in front of a whiteboard for any reason, like to structure your ideas and stuff like that. It's really fascinating. It's also fascinating to get into the mind of somebody who actually does comics for a living and see how their thought process works. But it's really fascinating. I'd recommend that. He has several books. Any one of them would be is really fun.
That's great. I'll have to recommend it to my son. He's big into the art side of the house, and he loves anime, Japanese like anime shows too. So he's fully on Crunchyroll, but he's always doing this, and I think it would be helpful. Maybe I'll get it for him for Christmas or something like that. But he's 15, so he's on the iPad now and everything else, using some of the comic tools on there too. So it's cool stuff. Good
Very
pick.
cool.
Well, Tom, really appreciate meeting you coming on the show. I think multiplayer is an amazing idea, and I hope it continues to grow and take off for you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.